Okay, it's December 6th at 9:02 p.m. I am with Terry Rollins. And okay, let's get started. So, where were you born and raised?
I was born in Central City, Nebraska, which 30 miles or 22 miles east of Grand Island. Moved to St. Paul when I was 5, which is 20 miles north of Grand Island. Stayed there till I went to college in Kearney.
Oh, that's cool. And when was your birth date?
7/23 of 1954.
Okay, and how old were you when and the war of Vietnam get started?
Oh, golly, I don't even know when it started. Um, I suppose when it got started, I was probably 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm. A long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And mm, do you remember what were you doing when the war started, or prior to the awareness of the war?
At that age, no. No.
Okay. um, how old were you when the start when you were in college? The war was still in
They
happening.
ended the draft. They drew numbers for the draft were lottery numbers, where if you had a low number, you went.
Yeah.
They drew the numbers for my age bracket,
Hmm.
and I had a really low number, so I either had to go to college or I was going to be drafted, but that was the same year that they ended the draft.
Oh, okay.
So I got out of it. My brother had more worries about it because he's 4 or 5 years older than I was. So he definitely had to go to college in order to stay so he didn't have to go. And that's what most of the guys were doing back then, was going and getting college deferment so they didn't have to go if they had a low
Yeah.
number.
Okay.
But,
So were you in a relationship or single at that time?
I had a girlfriend since I was
Yeah.
since 16 or whatever. But
So what was your understanding on why the U.S. was involved in Vietnam?
mostly I believe, to keep the North and South Vietnam from um, fighting each other or one taking over the other one, and the communist part of it.
Yeah. So, how did you learn or how did you receive information about the war?
Most of the war knowledge was all through the newspapers and nightly stuff on the news programs on TV was where you heard most about the war.
Hmm.
What was going, what wasn't happening, so forth and so on. It was just daily. I think people just got tired of hearing about it, go on and on and on, with nothing being ever done. I mean, the United States had the power; they could have went over and just wiped them all out and been done.
Yeah.
But no, instead they drug it on for years and years and years.
So,
They got into the jungle fighting,
uh-huh.
and the Viet Cong were much better at it than we were as far as fighting in the trees and the jungle. So it just kept going on and on and on.
Yeah. So tell me about how was what was your experience during the war? I know that you were in high school at the time.
Mostly in, yeah.
So what did you do during the war? Do you watch TV every time or?
Well, when I was a kid, TVs, we had maybe 3 channels.
Mhm.
And we didn't have all the other stuff. We didn't have the computers. We didn't have the phones. We didn't have any of that stuff. We had one telephone in the house, and it was attached to the wall. It didn't go nowhere. So, yeah, we watched the news. The news was on every night, so you saw the news. You read the newspaper.
Mhm.
And so that's where you
That was
pretty much it, yeah.
yeah. So do you have any family members or friends that went to the war?
Like I said, I have one friend later on in life, probably when I was 23, 24, 25, 26, somewhere in there, that he had been there. And he wouldn't talk about it. Knew him for years. He wouldn't say anything. If he once got him really, really drunk, and then he told me a little bit about it, but he just avoided talking about it because it was nothing but bad feelings and pain for him. So they didn't want anybody to bring it up. So if you understand his good side, he didn't bring it up. So,
You know, what were their roles, or what was his duties during the war?
I believe he was a medic on a helicopter.
Oh, that's cool. And he have any military experience?
Any what?
Military experience?
Well, yeah, they got shot at it even as they went to pick up guys to haul them back. They shot at him, but
Yeah. So how do you think he was treated during the war? Do you think the soldiers were good treated? Or do you think they get proper care?
I don't. During the war, I don't really didn't hear much about that. I think they were treated fine. It was just like it was the boredom that they were going through. They'd sit for days and nothing would be going on, and so they ended up sitting around, smoking marijuana and drinking beer as all they did for days on end sometimes. So when you're sitting over there, no place to go, nothing to do, nor anything else, I mean, they all developed some pretty bad habits.
Oh, yeah.
But,
And can you describe the atmosphere or of what the people were feeling during the war? Here in the U.S. or in your house?
most of the war, it was just everyday life. Here in the United States, we're basically protected from any of that type of thing, So it was just life as usual for the most part, other than you hear about the news.
Apart from the protests.
The protests, well, I didn't see any of that. I was in St. Paul, Nebraska. I wasn't.
On the city.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of hippies and a lot of that in the '60s and stuff like that did a lot of protesting, but I really wasn't involved or saw any of that firsthand, other than news reports.
Okay, yeah, but were you worried that the U.S. might not win the war?
I never really thought about it. I guess and I never worried about them. If they wanted to go over there and get it done with, they could.
Yeah.
It's more whether we could get out of there and still save face without everybody saying that they did whip our butts. But, because it was just a bad situation at the end. They just let it go on for too long. There's no way they could pull out of there and still save face, and wasn't worth going over there and bombing it all either.
And do you think that the soldiers back in Vietnam or in here, they feel any discrimination by being American?
By being American?
Yeah.
I guess I don't understand that question.
Like, since they were involved in Vietnam and killing a lot of people, those other countries, do you think they were talking or about the Americans?
Well, I don't think the soldiers had anything to do with the other countries.
Yeah.
They got probably more discriminated against when they came back home. And nobody welcomed them home, and nobody, tried to help them or anything else. And most of them had a lot of battle trauma, and they had their bad habits, their drinking and their smoking habits, and there really wasn't much or anybody making any efforts to help them.
So moving to the life after the war, what did you do in the days and weeks after the war? Or what the people were doing on that time after the war, when the war ended?
Me or the soldiers?
You.
Me.
Yeah.
When it ended, it ended. it was just going on for so long. It really wasn't affecting us anymore. Uh, so I just went on with life. I couldn't even tell you when it ended for sure.
Mhm.
When they finally pulled the last troops out of Vietnam, I couldn't even tell you which year it was.
So people were happy when they get back to the U.S. and they end the war.
I don't know if people were happy or not. There's a lot of mixed feelings about the war. Um, some people definitely wanted them out of there. Some people thought they should have stayed there and cleaned them out. So there's a lot of mixed feelings on on it. It's kind of like the elections. Everything's 50-50. 50 on
Mhm.
one side, 50 on the other. Um, it was just something that basically was ignored after the war. And just nobody talked about it anymore. Just ignored it.
Yeah. So how do you, what do you think that people were feeling about the U.S. withdrawing from the war?
The United States people,
Yeah.
I think most of us probably figured it was time for us to get out of there. But again, there's the ones that didn't care how we got out as long as we got out, and there's others that wanted to get out of there and
Mhm.
still save the face of the United States and such a itty bitty country giving them such a hard time for so many years.
Why do you think the U.S. failed to win the war?
I just think they couldn't decide what to do to finish it off.
Hmm.
They didn't. They were trying to get through it without making the United States look bad. They're trying to succeed without using all of our military power and so forth like that. And they got into the jungle wars, and it was almost impossible for us to go into their jungles where they knew all about where it was and how to get around and everything else, and get them out of there. They could hide for all kinds of time,
Hmm.
and we couldn't find them, and then they'd just sit there and snipe our guys and pick them off one at a time. And, it just wasn't a fair fighting ground, and I don't think the United States wanted to use a major firepower to end the thing.
Hmm. So do you think the main problem was from the leadership in here in the U.S. or it was another problem?
Well, that goes back to the government deciding what they wanted to do and what they didn't want to do.
Because
Um,
he was Nixon on the time that he was the president.
yeah, Nixon was doing a lot of it, yeah.
Hmm.
And everybody knows Nixon didn't do much any good.
So what lessons did you learn from the war that you want others to remember about time in history?
Time in history from the war, I think we got to remember to treat our boys that are forced to go over there, which now today they're all volunteers. There is no more draft, but
Hmm.
back then they were forced to go and fight a battle that they didn't really believe in. A lot of people didn't, and then when they came home, nobody wanted them. So we got to remember to take care of the boys when they come back, help them get over the trauma that they went through being there, and what they did for everybody else that's free.
Hmm.
What they gave up to make us free, keep us free. But that's probably the biggest decision about that. I guess we didn't learn much about extending wars. We're still doing it all the time. We don't always take the diplomatic route and don't go over and just get it over with. We got to try and work through and, white muscle and get the leaders and this and that. And they all carry on way too long. You know,
Hmm.
they need to learn how to end them a little faster.
Yeah. So it's obvious that the soldiers gain any experience. Also, the people that were in here about all the protests and that. So do you think that those experiences help them to shape them as a person,
To shape who?
as the soldiers, or the people that were in here, or including you?
Like I say, I didn't have much to do with the protests.
Yeah.
I never saw it or anything else, or really seen the evidence. Seen a lot of hippies, and you know, but I wasn't old enough when most of it was going on to really have it affect me any. I didn't know what they were, fighting about. They didn't want to go to war, so they're going to go to Canada. This or that. So, but other than that, I wasn't old enough most of the time to really be involved with it very much. Like I said, basically the war was ending when I was finally old enough to become involved. So
So once the war was over, did life return to normal?
pretty much it stayed normal for me during the whole war. Other than the news reports and stuff like that, didn't have any friends or relatives or anybody fighting in it. I didn't know anybody that was even fighting in it. So, other than news reports, I really had no experience with it.
Okay. So, mm, mm, mm. What do you think the U.S. could done differently?
I'm sorry?
What do you think the U.S. could done differently?
What they proved on differently.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why can they make differently?
How can they improve on what they did?
Yeah. Or what do you think that they can improve? They could improve. Or they can change.
You would hope they learned the lesson that basically just go over there and get it over with. And not let it drag on for years and years and years when nothing's actually happening.
Mm-hmm. If you could explain the war in one word, what would it be?
A mistake.
Why?
Why was it a mistake? Because they didn't take care of business. They let it go on, and so they did keep the communists out of there. But at the same time, we didn't get any respect. We just, a lot of people looked down on the United States for what they did while they were there, and so hopefully they learned the lesson not to let that happen again. But we're back in the same boat though with ISIS and all that stuff going on. It's dragging on forever and ever too. So
Yeah.
except it moves from one country to another country or whatever, and so it isn't as bad. But if they don't do something about that, it's going to develop in the same type of feelings.
So, since I know that you didn't go to the war, but do you think that the soldiers get any effect on their physical or mental health?
Oh yeah, like I said, they were almost everyone that I ever knew that came back from there was mentally messed up. They were either hooked on drugs or they were alcoholics, and the other traumas that they had, that they fought all the time in their heads and their sleep and everything else, they never got taken care of. Nobody helped them. So
Do you think that they join any veterans organization after that?
The guys I know had nothing to do with anything anywhere close to the war. And I think there's some now that are being accepted and they're more willing to talk about it and do the veteran type stuff. But immediately after the war, no. They all just wanted to forget it and try and get on with their life.
Yeah.
There's nobody here, nobody back in the States wanted them or didn't want to hear about it. So
So what are your feelings about the war in these days?
The feelings about the war when?
in these days?
About war in these days? Well, they're terrible, but they're something that will never go away. They're necessary to protect people's rights, so forth and so on. And because of the power that the United States is, it's always going to be in it. We're always going to be in wars to protect people from what's considered other by wrong to us.
So for you, was the U.S. a hero or a villain?
No, I don't know if they're a hero, but they're never a villain. I think their intentions are always good. Sometimes they don't get it right,
Hmm.
but their intentions are always good. So, no, I would never say the United States was a villain. No.
Tell me about a specific experience from the war, from the Vietnam War era that you can't forget.
I can't even think of one. I think I forgot all about it. um, Mostly, all the experience I have from it is my good friend and realizing how bad it affected him, and it was still affecting him all through life.
Mhm.
He never ever got over it, and like I say, he would never talk about it, but it was always there. If something was brought up about it when you were around him, you could just see his wheels start cranking, and he wasn't happy about it. So that's the biggest thing I remember is how badly it affected him. And I know he wasn't different than the other guys that went. I mean, I think it got them all pretty much the same. Some were better at hiding it. Some were better. Some couldn't hide it. Some couldn't ever maintain a good life or a basic life after it,
Mhm.
because they always had their night dreams, their everything else, and stuff like that they never recovered from because they never got treatment for it.
Yeah. So how do you think your friend was received when he get back?
When he came back, uh, he went as an 18-year-old. I think he's back by 20 or 21. He was done.
And he get any awareness?
No.
Okay. What do you think your friend will feel about his service today?
I don't think he probably still likes it. He's probably still regretting
Going to the
the
war.
whole thing. Yeah, wishing like hell that he had never um, been forced to be involved in it. But would be my guess. Like I say, he never talked about it. But
Yeah. Have your views on the war changed over time?
no,
Um,
there's something that's like I say, they're just people can't live together without having them,
mhm.
and there's always going to be disagreements for this or that, and you know, always try the diplomatic stuff, but then there's always the aggressors who aren't going to do diplomatic stuff. They're gonna shoot their way out of something rather than discuss it. So there will always be those times where you just have to go to the war. But if we can avoid them, better.
Yeah. So, if you could go back in time, and if you could have the age and everything, do you will go and fight in Vietnam again?
Would I go and fight the Vietnam War? No way.
Why?
I didn't want to. Well, I'm chicken to begin with, but I just couldn't see myself shooting at people. But because I wasn't a hunter, I wasn't a gun guy at all. I knew nothing about guns, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody to have to go to war. I think the guys that do that are special, the ones that can actually do that nowadays, and
Mhm.
But nah, it's not for me. I don't think I could handle it.
Okay. Yeah, so pretty much that was all. At least you want to add more or something else?
No.
Okay.